Zimbabwe, it is my hope that I find you well wherever you are. As the nation rallies everyone against the pandemic of COVID-19, and as the nation is ceaselessly engaged in the ongoing national vaccination program, it is my hope that we will all be safe wherever we are. Broadcasting from the resort town of Kariba, my name is Comrade Mugwadi, Director of Information and Publicity for ZANU-PF. Our host today is a beast in the game, himself being a communications guru in Zimbabwe, for those that care to know. And he's not new to many of us, a mentor to many. Our inaugural guest is a newsbreaker when he chooses to open his mouth. A mouthpiece of the throne, the spokesperson to the president, Comrade George Charamba, affectionately known in the media circles as Comrade GC. Comrade Charamba, my warm greetings and welcome to this occasion.
Hello, Comrade Mugwadi. Hello, Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much. Today we are going to discuss a variety of issues that are on the fingertips and mouth tips of everyone, that are causing discussions in the society and the communities, at individual, group level, everywhere. Constitutional Amendment number 2, bill that is, of course, sailed through Parliament now, the patriotic bill, and any other issues that are on the political market. So, Comrade Judge Charamba, my first question to you is the confusion in the opposition. What really is happening? What has consumed the opposition in Zimbabwe so far as the new dispensation is concerned?
I think the easy reading in terms of opposition politics in Zimbabwe is to scapegoat ZANU-PF for opposition wars. When you interrogate that easy reading, it's as if it suggests that the role of a ruling party is to organize opposition for itself. I don't think ZANU-PF has an obligation to ensure the well-being of the opposition. The basis of ZANU-PF's politics and career is to self-perpetuate. It is not to seek power. It is not to abdicate its own mandate to gather. I often laugh when I get some political simpletons indicating that the sole goal of ZANU-PF is power retention. What should it be? Why are you in government? Why are you a ruling party? If your intention is to power cede and not power retain? So really, the more wars afflict the opposition, the more assured ZANU-PF is as a ruling party unto eternity, which is the goal of any successful party, any successful leader, any successful politician. What we must do is to interrogate the philosophical foundation of the opposition in Zimbabwe. And when you look at that organizing idea around which the opposition is built, you discover there is nothing that is tangible, there's nothing that is solid. The solidity or a veneer of it in opposition politics is not in terms of what it seeks to affirm, as it is about what it seeks to negate. So you build your own structures, you build your own politics, you build your own agenda against that which you want to oppose, not against a vision of society, alternative society, that you want to usher in. So way back, it was Mugabe must go, ZANU-PF must go. Mugabe then goes, and goes because of internal processes. in ZANU-PF. And you find the opposition is in 6s and 7s. Do they then have to reinvent a new mantra to say ED must go? If they did, then they would discover ED is not in a hurry to go. They discover ZANU-PF is not in a hurry to go. Right? Then, of course, they are, in their minds, they see an unreconstructed ZANU-PF. Until they wake up one fine morning, they find ZANU-PF totally, radically reconstructed. And now they can't find a new organizing principle around themselves. And this crisis of lack of central organizing idea is a manifestation of the genesis of opposition politics in Zimbabwe. Opposition politics in Zimbabwe were never founded by concerns of an alternative vision of Zimbabwean society. Opposition politics in Zimbabwe were founded by an external force to mind an external agenda, to mind external interests in the work of land reform programs.
Now they say, I hear they were making noise in one of the parliamentary sessions saying that we also now want land. The job scholars, other MPs saying we need land. The government must also start giving us land. What does that imply?
When you borrow an agenda from a foreigner, and a hostile foreigner at that, you get to an absurd stage where you begin to work against your own interests. Because they were so much fixated with pushing the interests of the outsider, they never had time to reflect on their own interests within the Zimbabwean context. So when the land reform program came, land was distributed. And because they were beholden to the erstwhile colonial land holders, they could not be seen to be wanting that land, because to do so would have gone against their very founding principle, namely as a tool of external power, right? So they self-denied. And now that they've realized that the land reform program is not just irreversible, but it is also an economic necessity. They are now trying to join in. Unfortunately, social processes do not wait for you to recover from your status as a prisoner. The processes just unfold at the pace of social change. Land reform program is as good as done. What we are doing is just to do a more powerful exercise. Whether we are going to then try and accommodate those who yesterday were fighting in the corner of the foreigner, when in fact we have people, genuine Zimbabweans, who saw the visionary basis of land reform at the beginning, is debatable. In my view, I think we should assuage the need for land for genuine bona fide Zimbabweans who have always been a part of the national program before we go to these other citizens of ours who thought it prudent to oppose the land reform program.
Indeed, it's very disturbing that people who opposed the land reform yesterday even went further to invite sanctions as punishment for that exercise, now want to benefit from the same exercise. 20 years down the line, it is really confusing, but I'm sure for those who are listening, it has been probed well by the Deputy Chief Secretary and Presidential Spokesperson, Comrade Charam. Now let me attend to the question of Amendment Number 2, Constitutional Amendment Number 2 bill, which has sailed in Parliament, Comrade Charam. Can you just tell us briefly what is it?
It has quite a number of features to it. It makes provisions for women representation, women quota. It makes a provision, which is really a novelty, for the incorporation of the youth in mainstream politics. It seeks to create certain adjustments to our constitution in respect the tenure of judges, but also the mechanism or processes by which officers of the court join the bench. And lastly, it does away with the running mate concept, which is in fact alien and borrowed into our own political culture.
Rushing into the running mate clause, I think it is the one that has generated interest from members of the public, and it is also seen those in the opposition making allegations. I'm sure we are speaking to the rightful person because they are the mouthpiece of the presidency. There are people who are saying the removal of the running mate clause is aimed at resolving what are said to be problems existing in the leadership or in the presidency. And I'm sure you have seen those allegations coming from some newspapers and also some politicians saying maybe there is no harmony in the institution of the presidency, and therefore this clause is being put in place by ZANU to deal with that. Okay, what can you say about this?
I'll respond to that using two anecdotes, very illustrative anecdotes. Just a few days ago, we launched the Agricultural Finance Corporation Holdings. And those of us who listened intently to what His Excellency the President, Comrade Idim Nangagwa, said during that event, will recall that he emphasized that Zimbabwe has three factors to its name and its glory. We have the land, we have human capital, and then lastly, but not least, we have God on our side. I won't pontificate about the land. I won't even talk about the Almighty who is in the higher spheres. I want to focus on his ideas in respect of the middle factor, which is the human. He said, I'm not talking about the human as a physiognomical proposition. I'm talking about the Zimbabwean as a thinking being. That we must be able to be thoughtful, independently thoughtful. This is exactly how he puts it. Now, when you look at the notion of the running mate, it's a notion that we're trying to borrow from other jurisdictions to incorporate or engraft onto our supreme law. The Americans have it, and so do the Kenyans, and I think a few other countries who have incorporated it. And what it means essentially is that your main candidate who is vying for presidency will then pick on an assistant, but both are subjected to a national vote. So the essence of a running mate lies in elective politics of a country, right? The two characters who are foremost in terms of representation are both subjected to a national vote, which means the hierarchy between them is a matter of arbitrary party decision. Otherwise, in terms of processes that birth them, they are actually equal. What that does is it raises the grim possibility of disharmony in the body politic. Because essentially what you are saying, Mugwadi, is president is elected by Zimbabweans. Yes. The vice president is also elected by the same Zimbabweans. Right? You can even have a situation, and it has happened in other jurisdictions, where the vice president can actually get more votes than the president. You see? Yes. So you are already building within your body politic a basis for conflict, exacerbated by any disagreements which are natural in the process of running a country. Right? But also, you are making the number one definitionally unable to appoint his number two, because both are appointed by the voter. You notice? So that element of hierarchy is undermined. Unfortunately, when we were doing 2013 constitution, there was this fascination, and I want to disclose to Zimbabweans that the notion of the outlandish notion of a running mate did not come from ZANU-PF. It came from the opposition, who were so fascinated with concepts and things foreign to a point of not being able to interrogate the efficacy or the appropriateness of those borrowed clauses in our own situation. But also, this happened in a situation where there were so many forbidding examples in those jurisdictions which recommended against the notion of a running mate. And you know, reality is so unforgiving in its punishment. Even after 2013, we continue to see more and more examples. We saw it in Malawi, and just recently we saw it in the acme, so-called acme of democracy in America itself, between Trump, who was the president, and Pence, who was the vice president. Right? There was disagreement, yet both of them had come from the same process. Right? And because Pence was no longer in accord with his boss, the boss then sought to mobilize the demos or the public to lynch the deputy. That is exactly what happens, because you have built within your own democratic processes a destabilizing mechanism through the running mate idea. The point I'm trying to stress is the notion of the running mate was never a ZANU-PF agenda. Secondly, as we went through the motions of negotiating for the 2013 constitutional amendment, ZANU-PF made it very clear it was opposed to the idea of a running mate. I remember the current president coming to the then president, late Comrade R.G. Mugabe, to say, we have hit a cul-de-sac, we have hit a deadlock in respect of this key issue of running mate. It goes contrary to our own thinking, it goes contrary to our own philosophy as ZANU-PF. We have reached a stage of make or break. We are proposing that we break the draft constitution. The late president said, Emerson, have you forgotten what we did during the longest house negotiations that ushered in independence in 1979? There were two clauses we did not agree to. The one to do with writing into the constitution, the longest house constitution, a racial clause that meant 20 seats, a preserve of whites. And then secondly, the clause to do with land reforms, that these would be stayed for a whole 10 years. The racial clause meant there was not going to be an open contestation of seats for 7 long years. The whites would have their own role, and which no black could actually participate in. For 7 years. It was written in the longest house constitution. And in respect of land, no changes in terms of land ownership, except by consensus, except by willing seller, willing buyer for 10 years. Right? Those were completely anathema to what ZANU-PF, what ZANLA, what ZIPRA, what ZAPU stood for.
Which is the reason why they'd gone to war after all.
Exactly. But both our founding leaders, Comrade Mugabe and late Joshua Nkomo, agreed that we are the victors. Our mandate is not in doubt. from the Zimbabwean people and our durance in power will far exceed the 7 years or the 10 years. Let's not think like we are temporary holders of power. Let's think like we are long-term governors of the country on the basis of democratic credentials. So what's 10 years in the life of a country? What's 7 years in the life of a nation? In the life of a nation. So let's concede in order to make progress. After all, guns were booming, lives were being lost. Let's preserve life by putting up with these two odious clauses. Come seventh year, we will change. Come 10 years, 10th year, we will change. And we will govern as we please. What the British have merely done is to delay our transformation. It is not to kill it. Right? And that's what carried the day. So that wisdom, that experience was then brought to bear on the legal team of ZANU-PF in the context of the 2013 negotiations. And the agreement was that, well, let's allow it to pass, but with a very important caveat, a very important proviso, to say that clause will be held in abeyance for 10 years, right? During which time ZANU-PF calculated that there will be more forbidding examples being spewed out by different jurisdictions, forcing a rethink on the part of Zimbabwe, or that they will have persuaded the opposition to see eye to eye with ZANU-PF. But there is something that Zimbabweans are not aware of. As we were going through the same negotiation process, you had legal pundits from the opposition wanting to appear sophisticated by incorporating the running mate, and even taking a position against their own principles. When you looked at the disposition of those in leadership, top leadership, whether in the opposition or on the ZANU-PF side, no one wanted the running mate. Changai did not want running mate. Vamgabe did not want running mate. And I dare say, outside all these pretenses that we are watching and hearing, Nelson Chamisa does not want running mate. Douglas Monzora does not want the running mate. The same way that ZANU-PF, and for the same reason that ZANU-PF does not like running mates. So you have a party or opposition parties arguing against their genuine inner feelings, right? Which is why we knew and we were very confident that when the running mate amendment was tabled, there would be instant consensus, albeit masked by pseudo pretenses of objection, which is in fact what really happened. And you saw the result in the lower house and then recently in the upper house.
In fact, it actually got me shocked. The number of MPs that appear to disagree with the amendment, the proposed amendments, and the outcome of the voting, and in fact, the entire voting pattern from both the Senate and the House of Assembly.
There was a double-forked political communication. Outwardly, the opposition was pretending to oppose the running mate. But in terms of the behavior of their members in the lower house, in the upper house, the message was very clear. Oppose the running mate and vote with ZANU-PF to amend it. Right? So now you see a discrepancy between the superficies of political pronouncements, which are meant to play out for the benefit of the foreigners, to play out for pseudo-libertarians in the country, but that's at one level. Then you have the inner man, the inner person, who is saying, we don't want this thing, but we can't be seen to be publicly embracing ZANU-PF. After all, doesn't that amount to joining Pollard? Indeed, and not in pronouncement. So really, the result, there was nothing surprising in terms of what happened in the lower house and what happened in the upper house. We knew this thing was unstoppable because beneath the superficial noises, there was a general consensus that this thing was not good for us.
Thank you very much, spokesperson, for that clarification. I think those who have heard,
I was going to make a second anecdote. Just before we launched the 6.5 stretch, road stretch beyond Makuti on your way to Chirunga. I had a moment with the vice president. And then the vice president said to me, Charamba, how are things playing out? Then I said, well, congratulations, Comrade Vice President, the amendment number 2 went through. And then he says, yeah, the Justice Minister played things very, very well. Then I said, congratulations, Comrade Vice President. And then I teased him and said, except you're supposed to be the victim. So he burst out laughing, and then he says, well, if only they knew how happy the victim is. They don't realize I'm actually one of the key persons who was driving this thing behind the scenes. So it was weeping or dropping crocodile tears on the part of the opposition to try and pitch their pseudo objection of the amendment to the running mate on the person of the vice president, who was in fact very happy to
be driving with him.
Yes.
I think those, that puzzle has been answered. Those who didn't know, or who really, just like me, who were confused, the number of people opposing the amendment and their votes, it didn't agree. It has been clarified what was obtaining in the cockpit, in different political formations as it were. And also those that appear to suggest that it was meant to address so-called instability within the presidency. Now you understand really how this issue was pushed and who were the drivers of it. I think it solves a very big puzzle in the public.
You don't create instability within the hierarchy of ZANU-PF by wishing it. You describe it when it occurs. I always enjoy these false narratives which are always sponsored by the opposition, to say, well, there's a tiff between the president and the vice president. I really wish these people knew what I mean.
There you are. Need not explain further. You have heard it from the horse's mouth. Like I said before, he's the mouthpiece of the throne, the mouthpiece of the president, Comrade Charamba. Comrade Charamba, the amendment to do with the appointment of judges, a lot of noise from the same quarters that your principal, the president of the republic, and the president and first secretary of the party, from which I come from, they are accusing you, your principal, and us all of wanting to capture the justice system through that amendment. What is your response to that?
I have some little modest contribution to the provenance of the idea of amending that particular clause in the Constitution. And this was well before the current president, by the way. This was during the life of the First Republic. One day I bumped into the former Attorney General, Comrade Andrew Chigoyera, at Bond Street. There is a supermarket there. So he says, Charamba, do you have a moment for me? And then I said, yes, I do. And then he said, explain to me, what is the rationale of retaining a clause in our constitution which punishes a legal officer who is on the bench for growing wiser.
What do you mean?
There's an assumption that the more you are on the bench, the older you become, the more experience you pick, the more stable you understand, and broadly you understand the law, is the wiser you become in terms of the quality of judgments you deliver. Right? And that is a function of experience, it is a function of time, it is a function of maturity. Then Comrade Goyera said to me, look at what the Western world does. They don't punish a judge for being old. Yes, they can take action against a judge for being unwell or senile. But for as long as they are of sound mind, sound health, in fact, their age is celebrated and even rewarded. And just to buttress that point, you are aware there is a judge in the US Supreme Court who actually died
At 86.
in office. Right? So, he says, in our case, simply because of the movement of the hour clock, when you hit 65, your time is up, and it means you must leave. Yet this is about the time when you are beginning to pick real wisdom, when you are beginning to be really profound in your understanding, not just of the law, but the law vis-a-vis the society for which it is meant. So, we don't entrench your skills in our legal system. If anything, we host those skills by retiring you. In other words, we are punishing you on account of time, not on account of your soundness of mind, not on account of your own health, but merely because time is ticked. Right? This is the point that he made. And upon reflection, I said, wow. Every Monday we have our weekly brief. It comprises information, foreign affairs, security, and we are literally briefing the presidency from the perspective of information department, foreign affairs, security, and security breaks down in the president's department and police. That's the architecture of our briefing mechanism. So I decided I was going to make that my key briefing point. And I keep reminding you, this was not when we had the current president. He was still vice president. The man in the chair was the late President Mugabe. So I provoked a discussion, and there was an animated response. Right? What wasn't known to me was that, in fact, from that chance discussion I had with Enrich Goyera, we had actually made an impression on the leadership of the mind. And with time, I think there were lots of debates that happened within the party structures during the life of the First Republic, which then spilled over into the Second Republic. And boom, one day I discovered that was part of the amendments that would go towards amendment number 2. Right? So really, the justification is very simple. Right? As a judge gets older, as a judge handles more cases, as long as they are of sound health, as long as they are of sound mind, so too does their own sense of the law and society improve. They become wiser, they become more knowledgeable, they also begin to understand the human conduct and human behavior vis-a-vis the book of rules. You don't retire If anything, you actually harness that experience, harness that wisdom for the collective good of society. This is why that amendment literally moves the tenure of a judge from 65 to 70, with a provision to renew it on a yearly basis, provided, one, they show that they are of sound health, two, that they show that they prove that they are of sound mind. That's one side. The second side about it is the whole shrill, the hue and cry around that amendment behaved as if we had imported a practice from another planet. People forget that the position that amendment proposes is simply a return to the position we had before 2013. And before 2013, the president never decided on who becomes a judge. No, he never did. The Judicial Service Commission, and it comprises a whole balance of interests. The Law Society is there, the head of the civil service is there, you have the Chief Justice there, you have the Judge President, you have the head of the magistrates, you have many other interests who all are assembled to create what we call the Judicial Service Commission. These would come together, draw up a list of potential law officers who could then be considered for the bench. Do their own interviews, do their own assessment, and then ultimately draw up a recommendation which they would forward to the president. The president, in terms of our constitution, was then required to pick from the recommendations of the Judicial Service Commission.
Okay.
So you can see this is a process which had built-in checks and balance. Firstly, against the president, to make sure that he doesn't make arbitrary appointments, but also secondly, to ensure that the processes that then would yield a judge was an outcome of many perspectives coming from the constitutive elements within the Judicial Service Commission. Right? The various interest groups that are represented within the Judicial Service Commission, right? Such that what you then have by way of a recommendation to the sitting head of state is something that has been subjected to thorough interrogation from different angles and from different interests, so that what you have is a product which is in fact tested and very sound for the dispensing of justice. So that is the issue which we have done. We have simply gone back to the position before 2013, which are obtained. But also the last point I want to make is, there was a false outcry to say, why are you dispensing with interviews? You are stopping members of the public from participating in the appointment of judges. Let's interrogate that claim. There is a difference between a public hearing where citizens are invited to raise issues with potential appointees and a televised interview by competent persons. Right? When you look at the process that 2013 ushered in, it was a law officer intending to join the bench or a sitting judge intending to be promoted being subjected to a public interview by a coterie of limited competent persons. With you and me, the rest of Zimbabweans, simply sitting on the terraces and watching the spectacle. So there was never a time when Zimbabweans would leave the terraces to join the interview panel. And essentially when they say, why are you changing that? You are stopping us from participating in the appointment of judges. What they are pleading for is you are denying us the television spectacle. It's some kind of vaudeville that they are crying out for. Now, if they want a soap opera, ZTV is there. It can always provide that in the form of entertainment. And they should never confuse that with participation. Right. Now, linked to that is a further misconception to say the amendment removes interviews. It does not. What the amendment says is you are publicly interviewed. In other words, you are interviewed by competent persons in front of cameras upon your transition from being an officer of the court to join the bench for the first time. That is provided for in the
That
amendment.
means you can't seek to interview the promotion of those that are already on the bench.
As you move, say, from the High Court to the Supreme Court, there is absolutely no rhyme or reason for us to subject you to the indignities of a publicly televised interview, which you got upon entry to the bench. It's not dignified. It doesn't give you the regard which you deserve as the final arbiter on contentious issues bedeviling society. You know what? Yes, judges are a summation of competencies in terms of dispensing justice. But there is also this unquantifiable dimension about them, which comes by way of society's faith, the aura around the person of a judge, which makes him get society to believe that indeed this is a symbol of even-handedness. Now, when you reduce a sitting judge who makes the sinful mistake of wanting to be promoted to a public spectacle, you are distooling them from the gods of justice to mere man. This is the indignity which the amendment seeks to remove.
Now, when I think these things have been very much clarified, I plead with you, Comrade Spokesperson, if you could avail these notes to the public quite often so that people understand, including ourselves. When these people speak about these interviews, they would appear as if what was there was that a person achakwira bhazi kubva kwedu kumushabhoera uko osvika muchivhu okwira kombe achibva kuvillage opinda muharare onosvika kuti ndiri kutsvakavo justice ndinge kuri kuindwa ndauya kuzointerviewa majaji ndichada. That's how it is being played in the public.
That's a terrible misconception.
Now, yesterday, in fact, the day before yesterday, you spoke about the patriotic bill on your Twitter.
Yes.
You said, literally, by way of interpretation, we are now moving into this stage. Zimbabweans want to know, what is this bill about? What does it seek to address?
Well, prior to that tweet, I had done another tweet which posed a philosophical postulate. I actually, in false rhetoric, asked, why does a person who cheers for hostile foreigners, who cheers hostile foreign interests, deserve protection of Zimbabwe, its constitution, its laws, its institutions, and its personnel? You are cheering foreigners, which means you approve of what hostile foreign interests and foreign persons are doing to your own country, right? And yet still plead that Constitution 2013 must protect you in acting against your country, acting against your people, acting against your own interests by virtue of being a citizen of Zimbabwe. You want the army to protect you. You want the police to protect you. You want the president to protect you. You want the judges to protect you. Right? Yet you are acting against that which makes you Zimbabwean. Namely that you must attest and swear loyalty to the flag. Attest and swear loyalty to the land. Attest and swear loyalty, even offer your own blood in defense of that particular land you call home. Why do you still deserve all those protections? This was my rhetorical question to Zimbabwe. And I can assure you, before long, I hit over 100,000 hits when I posed that question. There was a very vigorous debate, and unfortunately, when we debate, Zimbabweans often confuse a principle with an example. So you then had reactions. Well, why are you allowing this or that group of foreign interest to come into Zimbabwe? Blah. I said, look. Whether these are the Russians, the Chinese, the British, the French, the Americans, the Japanese, that proposition still stands. If any foreign power, any foreign interest is acting against the national well-being, and you cheer it, what is the deserved and fitting retribution which this society must level against you? This was my question. I don't care what the nationality of that foreign interest is. I don't care what color, whether it's blue, black, yellow, green, white,
or colorless.
Right? I don't care. The point is, anything that is not Zimbabwean becomes foreign. And I am saying, your own disposition to that particular foreign interest, which expresses itself as explicitly hostile to Zimbabwe, your own disposition should be one of condemnation, instantaneous condemnation. In fact, we had some cleric who said, well, if I walk into a brawl and I find a Zimbabwean fighting a foreigner, I don't ask what the essence or the cause of that conflict is. I just join the fight to help my Zimbabwean brother or sister, and then ask afterwards, when the enemy is down, why are we fighting? Because that is the instinctive reflex, the reaction of a person who believes in their heritage, in their country, in their place, in their fellow citizens, and in their own interests. So essentially, we have had this very bad experience as Zimbabwe from 1998 right up to now, where we have seen Zimbabweans providing the first draft of sanctions bill, illegal sanctions bill, imposed against the country by foreigners. Right? We know that Zidera was drafted here in Zimbabwe. Yes. And we even know we have persons we can paste to that draft. We know that the European law that was used against us as sanctions was done emerged from here. A cabal of lawyers in the opposition did actually draft those pieces of obnoxious legislations which have wreaked havoc on this country by way of social lives, by way of the economy, by way of our politics, by way of our own integrity as a nation state. I mean, you can't have a foreign power outside of the UN framework deciding that, well, it is time Zimbabwe is punished merely because your own interests as a nation, not as a global community, as a nation, have come unstuck. I mean, Zimbabwe does not subsist to further interests of another foreign power. I mean, that's not our business. That's not our vocation, right? Now, when you have citizens participating against their own country in favor of foreigners.
In fact, let me just try to invite your program into this issue. You are aware, Comrade Spokesperson, there was a weekly revelation to the extent that one of the leaders of opposition today actually indicated to the Americans that pleading with them to invade Zimbabwe.
Yes. You see, that's the ultimate form of treachery. Because essentially what you are doing is you are converting with a foreigner to undermine the very essence of your nationhood, right? And in other jurisdictions, including the American jurisdiction, when you associate with a hostile foreigner, you can actually get jailed.
Free right to Guantanamo.
In other words, you are stripped of all the protection of the Constitution, and you face the music. By the way, the blueprint to the patriotic bill is found from American law.
What is that?
The law that we are fashioning our patriotic bill after is in fact an American law. And the beauty about that is those in the opposition who are financially beholden to America, who are ideologically beholden to America, are now finding themselves in a very invidious situation where their idol state is in fact the source of the precedent to the law we are making here. And we are challenging them to say, give us a sound argument which indicts Zimbabwe but excuses your model state of your model state of America. And they are in a situation now. Look, in politics, my vocation is to create dilemmas for my opponents. And here is one perfect storm we are creating for the opposition. We want to see them opposing that bill. And then we ask them, in other words, you are opposing patriotic bill because you want to cheer foreigners, because you want to push for foreign agendas. Who are you protecting? Who stands threatened by patriotic bill? Because all we are saying is love your flag, love your country, love your people, love your resources, love your interests, and pursue them relentlessly. Why is that hostile to you?
What in fact you are saying the law is being, the bill is clear here. Defend, protect that which is yours.
Exactly.
Why are you offended? You don't want to. Why are you offended?
Exactly. Exactly. Meanwhile, you are singing the national anthem. Have these guys ever stopped to interrogate the words which are in the national anthem? Have these guys ever read the preamble of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, which they are now waving as the Bible of human rights? Does it teach you to hate your own country? Does it teach you to hate your own people? Does it teach you to hate your own interests? Does it encourage you to invite foreigners into your affairs? Does it encourage you to invite foreigners to attack yourself, to attack your mother, to attack your father, to attack your brother, to attack your community, to attack your society, to attack your nation, to attack your country? You see? And this is exactly what we are trying to make punishable through the patriotic bill. And I would want and I challenge the sharpest of their lawyers to demonstrate to me in what way that bill as proposed stands in violation of the supreme law of the land.
The question is coming actually to you, and I'm sure they are listening, and I'm sure those who stand affected by it as they saw alleged themselves are watching this. The questions have been posed to you. Why are you afraid of defending that which is yours? How do you feel? How do you suggest this is an offense to you or that you have been targeted when the law is simply being very clear here? What parts of that bill do you seek to violate
let me just add another dimension. I have heard a very false argument, and it's coming from the media fraternity, to say the patriotic bill is a gag order. It's an instrument for censoring free expression and freedom of association. Those of us who have studied the media as it has evolved over centuries, and I see it is very fashionable to crassly quote the American First Amendment. Congress shall make no law that abridges freedom of expression. Do you know how it came about? In 1776, when the Americans were fighting the British monarchical rule on American soil. Remember, historically, Americans are nothing but Britons transplanted on American soil. But Britons who were imbued with a libertarian spirit politically, libertarian spirit spiritually. Mayflower was a ship that transported Britain's dissidents, those who objected to monarchical rule and wanted to find a new space or labyrinthram, to use the German term. They wanted new space. But in finding a new space, it meant conquering another people's country, the Indians, right? Who were the indigents of America. And they exterminated them, right? Now, because they had found a colony away from Britain, the British monarch said, by virtue of the fact that you are our citizens, whatever polity you find across the oceans is an extension of Britain, which means you must subject yourself and come under the authority of the king, of the queen, right? That was the essence of the conflict which precipitated the so-called American Revolution, right? Which was a war of independence. The amazing thing about it is, when Britain transplanted itself into America and founded a new country, in quotes founded, various trades emerged. You had your traders, you had your manufacturers, but more critically, you also had your publishers. When the war against the monarch emerged, the publishers joined other trades in fighting the British. They were fighting the British as a monarchical authority, but they were also imploring in that fight their own rights to make money from publishing. You notice? So, when the Constitution of America was then written, and you know it was the Constitution of America sought to balance the vying interests that had fought for the American independence. The publishers then sponsored a clause which says America shall not make any law that abridges freedom of expression. It's a clause that was not meant to ensure that you speak without strictures. It was meant for publishers as a business proposition. That's why that same amendment does not protect you when you spout communism in America.
When you are alleged to be linked to terrorism.
Exactly.
By way of suspicion.
Exactly. Even by suspicion, not even trial. You notice, right? So, what that teaches you is what comes to us as a stricture called freedom of expression has its provenance in certain historical interests that are linked to publishers who participated in the American War of Independence.
As part of the spoils of...
Yes, of course, of the Boston on our processes, right? Now, I made reference to Zimbabweans as having a human resource, but a human resource that is thoughtful. This is the danger you always face when people abstract clauses without understanding the historical context.
Yes,
Right?
yeah.
Now, someone tells you, we don't want patriotic bill because it's a way of abridging our freedom of expression. The British have a very good saying. You don't cut your feet in order to fit the shoe. Awende mabhata oti gumbo rangu rakurisa iri richechenyedzeiwo kuti rikwane mushango yamagadzira. What you do is you actually say, hey guys, how come you're manufacturing small shoes? I have a big foot because
Size 12.
tiunotanga handiti mazvona. So is someone telling me that we must condone treachery against this nation for the sake of freedom of expression? Chinotanga chii? Why are you pitting the plumage and forgetting the dying bird? Kuti shiri, mambava eshiri aya akuparara, asi shiri yachona haina kumwa mvura, haina kudya sadza, iri kufa. So how do you expect kuti mambava aya anosurvive when the bird which carries them is dead? So what begins is Zimbabwe first, and all other rights follow. Mazona, the first right is the right to life, and the nation has a life. So we must guarantee that. Even Maslow tells you that lower order needs must be met first, and then you scale up. And it's actually yes, but you can't actualize before you have self-reproduced. You see, you are facing an existential threat. Then you come to me and say, yes, you want to shoot me. What will happen to my freedom of expression? Does that make sense to you?
I think the indictment here is that Zimbabweans will need to be very serious.
And
On
think independently.
Yes, discussions dzatinojoinera pamusoro dzimwe dzacho ngatitanei dzatinosvikira tanzwisisa kuti idzi ndidzo dzinodhika idzi kwete zvokungojoinera tisingazivi.
Musandipfura, what will happen to the pen which is mightier than the sword? My God.
Comrade spokesperson, we exhausted our discussion on a special issue. We are on our way from Chirundu, the 6.5 kilometer road rehabilitation program at Maroon. You accompanied your principal, the president, and several senior officials of government. The Japanese were there on the launch, the commissioning of that project, which is started 2 years ago. Zimbabweans want to know how important are these projects, the roads project, because it appears the signature of the president now, above everything, is now on the roads. You are aware Harare Bridge, now this one, others are also taking place. What is the secret to this roads revolution program?
If you are familiar with the National Development Strategy 1, there is a key component of it which looks at the rehabilitation of our own infrastructure. And top on the list of that rehabilitation of our own infrastructure is the communication network. And I'm talking about hard infrastructure that serves communication. We draw a distinction between the soft infrastructure and the hard infrastructure. And within the hard infrastructure, we also make 4 distinctions. You have your roads, you have your rail, you have your air, and then you have your pipelines. Those are the 4 modes of hard infrastructure in communication. Right? And each has its own demands. Right? if you look at your air travel, it is largely patronized by the elites, right? And therefore it just impacts on a small catchment. Except, I keep reminding Zimbabweans, the one lesson we learned from Cyclone Idai was how peaceably low our lift capacity was. We took quite a while before we were able to access Chimanimani because we were short of helicopters, short of weather. So ultimately, when you're dealing with emergencies, your communication infrastructure should be one that allows you to respond effectively to any disaster. Once the roads were rendered impassable, we literally had to mobilize our military to walk to areas affected. And our army did us amazing crime. Right? But it did dramatize the limitations that we have as a country infrastructure. So, we have those 4 branches of hard infrastructure for communication. What you are looking at is a commitment under the Second Republic led by His Excellency the President, Comrade Idi Mnangagwa, to attend to the primary infrastructure which has to do with communication, namely the road network. And we draw a distinction between trunk roads or arterial highways, right? Roads that feed into those arteries. And then we also talk about roads that are focused on servicing urban conurbations. Right? All those roads are receiving attention. Right? Because of sanctions, and of course because of the poor economic performance related to sanctions, that infrastructure was in a state of disrepair. Now the President's position has been to say, if we can't move goods and services efficiently, it means we are imposing a cost on the economy. Remember, when we talk about value in an economy, we speak about the value of time, we speak about the value of place. Value of time talks to how much it takes you to move raw material from its source to the point of processing. The Japanese have done it so well that you don't need to warehouse any raw material. They have developed what they call JIT. JIT. JIT means just in time. Which means kana tikatanga manufacturing process na 11 and we need so many tons of raw materials. You don't need to warehouse those, you don't need to keep my buffer stocks. You have such an excellent road and rail network that exactly at that time, my raw materials are nowhere to allow the engines to keep rolling. You notice? That's what. That's where you have the concept here, JIT. And what communication infrastructure does is it collapses time, it collapses space. You are beating space. So kuti nzungu dzabva kubwera kana kotonuri yabva kubhuku hazvina nebasa when you have an efficient communication system, right? So what we are trying to do is to ensure that we create a network that allows time value. Second aspect of the value is place. Kana doiri chimanufacture kuno kuHarare nzungu dzichiorera kubwera. In other words, we have failed to move a commodity from a place a production to a place where it's most needed for manufacturing, which means we have undermined place utility. I'm getting into hard economics now, right? So essentially what we're trying to do, and that which imparts time utility and place utility is your communication. And therein kicks in issue of roads, and it you reduce logistical costs, you impart time value, you impart place value to your entire economy. And the more efficient your communication process is the more efficient your own production and the lower the costs. Right? So what we are trying to do is to make sure that within our own internal roads, there is that very efficient, safe communication network which reduces transit time or travel time, if we are talking about human beings. Right? Now, coming to the project which we commissioned, which the President commissioned in Makuti. Apart from the poor state of the road, there was also a physical barrier. It's a very mountainous area, right? And over time, that infrastructure was getting weaker and weaker. It was getting accident prone. We were losing men, we were losing materials, we were losing transit time. And Zimbabweans, don't worry about the 6.5 kilometers. It is not the distance which is an issue. It is the reduction of risk, the reduction of transit time over this very hard, rugged area. Therein lies the significance of what the Japanese have done for us. First point. Second point, since the sanctions were imposed on us by the West, the Japanese never participated in sanctions. But they also felt constrained by the new situation which sanctions brought about. So they tended to hold back on full throttle communication with Zimbabwe. What we saw in 2019 when the president went to TICAD 7, which took place in Tokyo, was the resumption of normalization of interaction between Japan and Zimbabwe, which essentially means the weakening of sanctions against Zimbabwe. Right? So, this was a symbolic gesture, a statement eloquent statement, loud ringing statement by the Japanese to say, hey Zimbabwe, we are back and we are ready to do business with you. And if you consider that Japan is probably your third largest economy. I think the first is America, followed by China, you have then Japan, and then you have Germany. We have the third largest global economy sending this signal to small Zimbabwe. Can you imagine the bandwagon effect that is likely to have on the rest of the world? But as we build this bandwagon effect, so too do we weaken sanctions which the other Western powers are trying to impose on us. So that is the second significance. The third significance is when you see the president leaving the country to participate in foreign projects, to participate in foreign summits, don't always see it as a cost. The president is the foremost diplomat for the country. He is actualizing engagement and re-engagement. Yes, the results may not always be instantaneous, but the results will ultimately come to benefit our country. And here is a classical example of that benefit. You will be aware that on the same event, the Japanese then said, we have done 6.5 kilometers. We will do another 6.5 kilometers so that the entire stretch, which is 13 kilometers long, of rugged terrain will be tamed by the Japanese engineering ingenuity and Japanese generous finance. But this on a key corridor, north-south corridor, right, which starts from Chirundu and goes as far down as Bait Bridge. Or if you want, from Bait Bridge going to Chirundu. So we are seeing a portion of that load being taken off our shoulders and being assumed by a friendly country we call Japan. to then complement our own efforts. And ultimately, the economic value of that intervention will come by way of the volume of traffic, the volume of business that benefits from that north-south corridor. This is why the president says the road is an economy.
And then the president indicated that one of the reasons why this road is so special is that it attests to his vision that Zimbabwean roads must speak to and talk to other roads. The vice president added upon it, says the road shall link Zimbabwe and Southern Africa to commerce. Can you elaborate on that?
I spoke about the road network within Zimbabwe by way of arterial roads as well as my feeder roads. The feeder roads are localized. They allow our farmers to feed into the main ways, right? But that is within the polity of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe does not exist as an island unto itself. It interacts with economies around us and beyond. We must move our goods to the ports. We must move our goods to neighbors. We must move our goods worldwide. Now, for that to happen, we should have hard infrastructure, communication infrastructure that talks to main roads, main rails, main airports, main pipelines which exist around us, which then allows us to beat distance sub-regionally, continentally, and globally, so that we then get integrated within the mainstream global economy. Now, if you look at our key markets, they exist in SADC. That's where our trading partners are in the main. They exist in the Middle East, and you notice Dubai has become, United Arab Emirates has become a key, in fact a leading market for Zimbabwe, right? They exist in COMESA, where we have had a very dominant role to play. Now, that north-south corridor answers to our requirements as an exporting economy up north, which is why it is so critical to us. So yes, that is exactly the idea behind the Second Republic and behind the president's thinking, to have top-notch infrastructure that talks to the region and allows us to move our goods across space, across time.